All right, welcome back to another special episode of The Unknown. My name is Michael Volpe. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. That's in Cook County, and I write at michaelvolpe.substack.com. And my broadcast partner is Richard Luthmann, and he's somewhere around Fort Myers, Florida. He doesn't like to say exactly where, but he's definitely in Lee County, and he's very proud that it's named after Robert E. Lee. And it's Luthmann, Luthmann.substack.com. And we are joined by Connie Reguli, who's an attorney. Are you still an attorney? You like Rich, you had some issues with the bar. You were a little too aggressive, according to them, trying to advocate for your client. Let's start really quickly with that. We want to talk about shaken baby syndrome, but I haven't actually interviewed you. You were advocating, according to them, a little too hard for your clients.
Yeah.
Overzealous representation is the way they basically pronounced it. You were convicted. That was reversed. Are you still allowed to be a lawyer?
Yeah, no, so they made up a whole fake crime and I'm going to give you the really short version of it because we're currently going to the Sixth Circuit. When I'm able to kind of just lay this out for everybody, you're going to be just totally like blown off your feet of how far they went. But I was a very aggressive attorney against the Department of Children's Services and actually raising judicial accountability issues. And in 2018, I was trying to help a mom and preserve her disabled child from going into state's custody. They claimed that we broke the law. We did not break the law. They made up a fake crime. The DA and the judge and the police department and the DCS attorney all worked together to make up totally fake crime. And because they all were all coordinating, they were able to convict me of two felonies, accessory after the fact, and which immediately suspended my license. And even though the whole thing has been reversed, and the Supreme Court will not set aside the suspension, likely because they don't really want me in the courtroom again. But we'll leave that long story for another day. But currently, I am in suspended status. But I have a very large group, Family Forward Project. We'll talk a little bit about
Right.
that if you don't mind at the end of the broadcast
We
to
will.
kind of talk about where we are currently.
All right. We
Before we
will.
go, Mike, before that, I got a question about that just for the viewers because you were the attorney on a very landmark case, Andrews versus Hickman County, and the Sixth Circuit affirmed basically that social workers are subject to the Fourth Amendment, and child services can't just enter homes, and there needs to be judicial process in place, warrant process and due process to remove children. Do you believe that some of your legal troubles are retaliatory against that landmark victory in
Oh,
Andrews?
absolutely. And that was the first one. And I'll tell you, Richard, I dove into that case as my very first civil rights case, not knowing a whole lot about what I was doing. And it is the first case in the Sixth Circuit Court where we were able to sustain, which I flipped the district court, the lower court's decision to get to, let everybody out of the case. But I did make that. That is a landmark decision for the Sixth Circuit. Thank you for bringing that up. And that kind of ticked a lot of people off, but that's way back in 2012. What I did subsequently to that was I picked up another case in 2014 where a juvenile had been sexually assaulted in the Williamson County Detention Center and filed a civil rights case over that. And that is JHV Williamson County. And the Sixth Circuit also, although they gave immunity, unfortunately, they did make a finding, and it is a reported precedental case that says that solitary confinement for kids is unconstitutional. Believe it or not, it took until 2018. That really pissed them off. I'll just say. And that's when their aggression just went over the top.
Listen, I've done a lot of stories on this. Michelle McDonald was very aggressive in Sandra Grazzini Rucky's case, and that's why they went after her. My friend Fletcher Long was just beating, and he's out of Tennessee. You probably know Fletcher. He was beating the prosecutors in case after case after case. That's why they went after him. Leslie Federicos was very good at getting people out of probate, and that's why they went after her. They use and misuse both criminal law and especially bar rules because those are extremely vague. To go after attorneys, they don't like attorneys that shake things up, that are challenging the establishment. And that's what they did to you. There's no question about that. But you reached out to me because there's a landmark ruling out of New Jersey, and we're going to get into the legalese of this on shaken baby syndrome. I love doing this. We want to set the bar. What is shaken baby syndrome?
Yeah, so I've been very aggressive at fighting CPS cases for many, many years. And expert testimony is the demon of a case, right? And it's what every attorney struggles with, because we're attorneys, we're not doctors, we're not scientists, we're just attorneys, right? And when you have an expert show up in a case, it always puts shockwaves through an attorney. It just does. It's like, how am I going to overcome this? And the huge thing in CPS cases is child abuse pediatricians. And child abuse pediatricians were certified as a special class of pediatricians in 2009. They started pumping every children's hospital in the United States, including Vanderbilt, including all the hospitals that John Hopkins, Children's, et cetera, with a doctor called a child abuse specialist pediatrician who started diagnosing everything with child abuse. And then they would call that one doctor to testify. Now, just if you think about it, a child abuse pediatrician is not a specialist in anything. They're not radiologists. They're not orthopedic doctors. They're not endocrinologists. They're not gastroenterologists. Okay. All they do is look for symptoms and signs and then diagnose child abuse, which really put attorneys at a disadvantage, because you can't ask them questions about the radiology, right? You can't ask them questions about, and you can't get other experts, and nobody will testify against them, primarily because in every city in this country, the pediatric doctors have practice privileges at these children's hospitals, and they don't want to risk their practice privileges by testifying against a child abuse pediatrician. It is such a circular thing to overcome. So one of them is shaken baby syndrome. So there are two big ones that we have struggled with. One is the fractured ribs. The other one is shaken baby syndrome. If you read back in this case, it goes deep into the history of it, but you're really talking about looking back in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, when they started creating what they called battered child syndrome. And they, even though they could not recreate, they could not do real research, like recreate the event that caused these symptoms. They said that retinal hemorrhages, subdural hematomas, and encephalopathy, which is brain swelling, could only result from shaking a baby violently. Now, first of all, just from a logic standpoint, I want you to think about a baby, and I want you to think about their neck. Okay, none of these cases showed that the babies had any fractures, splits, broken bones in their necks. Okay, so apparently you can shake a baby so hard that their brain bounces around in their brain, bounces around inside their skull, and it splits capillaries between the two hemispheres of the brain, but they have not one single fracture in their neck. This was the theory, and everybody embraced it. Everybody from the pediatric abuse side embraced it. However, the scientists at the biomechanical side did not embrace it. And they started eventually trying to figure out how to, the biomechanical people are over here, the pediatric medicine people are over here, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, who likes to control pediatricians, was embracing the medical community that said it's abuse, it's abuse, it's abuse. And the biomechanical side is saying, wait a minute, you can't recreate this, and it would be unethical to shake a baby so hard that it would break their necks. They actually did do it with monkeys, believe it or not. It talks about in here the monkey experiments where they kindly anesthetized the monkeys and then gave them whiplash to try to see what kind of injuries would occur. So there was already in the 60s, 70s, 80s began to be sort of this conflict in the scientific community, but the prevailing began because attorneys are so strapped. They don't have the resources for experts. They're not medical scientists. They're not prepared to combat this kind of stuff. And so these people were going to prison and going to jail.
And losing their kids. But
and definitely losing their kids.
As a layman, I assume if you shake your baby, a lot of damage can be done to the baby. So what I think what you're saying is the problem is trying to get from A to B is voodoo. Am I right? It's not that there's not damage from shaking a baby, but to go from whatever the breaks and the bones are, to saying it was because the baby was shaken is
Right.
basically voodoo. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah. And the same kind of thing happened with fractured ribs. And we'll switch over to the science here in a minute. But, I had a fractured rib case where a little tiny baby who was premature at 3 months old out of his parents saw a swollen ankle, took him in. He had 27 rib fractures. They were immediately coming after the parents for severe abuse. The child abuse pediatrician said the only way that baby could have 27 rib fractures is if the parents squeezed the baby so hard they fractured their ribs. Now, here's some things, just again, just from the logical standpoint, I started asking questions. Number one, so all of these rib fractures are at various stages of healing. It means some were already almost healed, and I got into the science of how a rib fracture heals, how the calcium builds up, how the calcium dissolves. They're all at various stages of healing. So that means that a parent would have to pick up a baby and pop one rib at a time. Number two, there's never a broken rib. Okay, so if they're squeezing a baby hard enough to fracture their ribs, you would think at some point there'd be a broken rib. Number three, there was never any bruising. Number four, there was never any internal injury. And when I looked at that, I'm like, okay, there must be some other medical issues going on here. And so I dug in. I spent hours and hours and hours, and I ultimately did prevail in that case. But that's kind of the situation with fractured ribs. With shaken baby, these symptoms that you have, which are the retinal hemorrhages, which is right behind the eye, the subdural hematoma, which means somewhere between the brain and the skull, there's a bleeding, there's a bleed, and then the swelling of the brain. So a few things can happen. I know one of my favorite people, Terry LaPointe, who has done many of the stories. She actually started because she was actually a doula at one point. She thinks that partly some of the medications, such as Pitocin, can actually thin the baby's blood so that there is actual seepage. But even if not, there are babies who have strokes. So that is not, I don't want to say it's common, but it's something that occurs. Babies have trauma from labor and birth, and sometimes babies have strokes. And so that can cause some subdural bleeding. And they're not all three of these things occur at the same time, like they say they should. So the problem is, if it's not shaking, there must be some type of medical condition going on with this child. And because they label it shaking, they're ignoring any other medical issue that could be going on with the child.
Kind of, sort of like Munchausen, where they claim that they've eliminated all other possibilities, but I don't think
Mhm.
you could ever eliminate all other possibilities. All right, now you reached out to me because there was a landmark, I think was your words or words to that effect, decision in New Jersey on shaken baby syndrome, and I've got it up. So what did the court in New Jersey find?
Yeah, so this is a very important decision, and I listened to the entire oral argument. Now, I've practiced law for 30 years, so sometimes I may get too deep into the weeds from the legal standpoint, but I did listen to these judges, and then I pulled the entire argument and read through it, and so to dig a little deeper, and you guys can stop and ask me questions if you want, but when you're looking at experts in the court system, there are certain standards that you have to take a look at. And one of them is called the Fry standard. Okay, so the Fry standard is a United States Supreme Court case, 1923. And basically, the Fry standard says that for you to present expert testimony to a jury, the science has to be widely accepted within that scientific community. And it can be any type of science. It can be psychology, it can be medicine, it can be hydraulics, it can be, it can be chemical reactions and fires, but the underlying thing is what an attorney had to do is to get their expert to say it is widely accepted within this scientific community, this medical community, this biomechanic community, et cetera. And so they went into this case arguing that the widely accepted within the scientific community was really kind of a artificial standard. and which is so true. So if you think about it, from 1920,
So from what I'm reading, what the opinion said was that these biochemical engineers should be biomedical engineers,
yeah.
biomechanical engineers should be on equal footing, and because they dismiss it, you don't have the widespread approval. Is that basically?
Yeah, that's kind of, you're jumping ahead of me here.
Go ahead. All right, go ahead.
That's okay. So that's kind of where we're going. So where is biomechanical versus the medical? But this part of this that from 1923, this whole widely accepted within the scientific community from the pediatric medical community, some of the things that they did to quote unquote make it widely accepted was do their own studies. Okay. Now, what were those studies? One of those studies was called confession studies, which they weren't real clear about. But basically, what they said, they took the cases where somebody confessed to shaking their baby and injuring their baby, and then looked at what the medical conditions were of the child. Okay. That's a confession study. Now, for every attorney who looks at a confession study, you go, hang on here, wait a minute. Sometimes people confess and plead guilty if they're standing in the courtroom and they're faced with attempted murder and their attorney says, look, you can plead to an assault and admit to an assault, and then you won't have to go to trial. Okay, that's a confession, right? Because they have to stand in front of a judge and say, yeah, I shook my baby. And the same thing happens in CPS and DCS courts, where you go in and they're like, hey, we've got this expert that's going to come in and testify against you. You're never going to see your child again. So if you just confess to child neglect and that you shook your baby, okay? So those are confession studies, which are very lame to begin with, all right? But out of these confession studies, the American Academy of Pediatrics created a consensus statement. Okay, so the consensus statement, which is not every pediatrician in the United States, it's a select group of elite pediatricians who are able to get some type of leadership position in this very elite organization who is financially supported by Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies. They created a consensus statement which says that this is shaken baby syndrome when you have these three symptoms. They send that out to all pediatricians. So now your child abuse pediatricians and all these hospitals come into court and testify, oh, but the American Academy of Pediatrics has created a consensus statement based upon the studies, which are the confession studies, to show that this is child abuse, right? You see how that happened?
Right.
Yeah.
Then you have the biomechanical people over here. Now, part of the oral argument they talked about, which is true, the pediatricians, when they're studying their specialty, they do have some biomechanical training because think about car accidents, right? How does a broken bone happen? How does whiplash happen? How does a chest injury happen during a car accident? That's not a disease. That's not a virus. That's not a sickness. It's an injury. So they do some biomechanical studies in medical school. And so all the biomechanical specialists stand up and go, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Now, apparently the biomechanical people, though, are not as organized as the AAP because they probably don't get funding from major pharmaceutical companies, right? So this biomechanical, there's not really like a consensus study that's developed, or they weren't really able to sort of create the impact because they were in direct conflict with the AAP. So that's where it ended up. And that's what this case is about. This case is about when, even if you are looking at widely accepted within the scientific community, isn't the biomechanical community as important as, and their expertise as important as the medical community?
I think what I'm getting is the side that won was able to convince the court that there's enough controversy here that it's not widely accepted, that there's plenty of people saying this is completely bogus, and the court liked that argument.
Yeah, well, I mean, and they, I want to be careful because some of the people have put out there on social media, oh, SBS is now junk science. It's not junk science, okay?
Well, it
So
is according to this ruling. The
Mike,
ruling says it is right there.
I have a
The
question right
court,
here.
the Thursday decisions affirms the lower court ruling that had declared shaken baby syndrome junk science. It is
But
according
that's
to this court.
editorialization. Mike, I have a very important question, and
Mhm.
it happens a lot in family court, and it's this word. It's a very simple word, but I don't know if this is a legal term or a scientific term, and that's called syndrome. We hear it all the time. Shaken
yes,
baby syndrome. We hear it, but we've heard it before. Parental alienation syndrome. We have, the DSM has syndromes in it. But at the
Mhm.
end of the day, you can make the argument that if a pill could cure parental alienation, it would be a
Mhm.
syndrome tomorrow if the
Right.
pharmaceutical
right.
monetize off it. So I'll ask you, Connie, as a lawyer, what is a syndrome? What is the legal definition of a
Mhm.
syndrome?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that's a legal term.
Yet
That's,
it's used
but
all the time in the courts of law, correct? It was used
well,
to the New Jersey Supreme Court. It was parsed into by the New Jersey Supreme Court, understanding this syndrome. The prosecutors were bandying about the courtroom, shaken baby syndrome, syndrome. So isn't part of the issue here the prejudicial effect that this rubber stamp of a syndrome has on a jury? When somebody says this is a syndrome, then it
right.
has this automatic good housekeeping seal of approval of credibility that may not be warranted. Is that really one of the core issues that's going on here?
Yeah, it is because this term syndrome has sort of gained its class or its character from looking at specifically the what they identify as there's a word in medicine called pathognomonic. Okay, so I always forget that word, but pathognomonic means that something that you see is pathognomonic or the an explanation for, let's say, this. Okay, so if you see this is a total explanation for this. That's what in medical community they sort of consider pathognomonic. So those syndromes say, okay, we see this, and we don't have any other excuse for it. So we're going to label it this. And that's what the syndrome is. And if you go way back to, the battered child syndrome that was created in the 50s and 60s, et cetera, that's what they're doing. They're saying, okay, you see the child has bruises, a child has they have maybe 10 things, and if 4 out of those 5 things, then it is a syndrome. I just happened to come across one the other day about if a baby is born, and there's a checklist, like any of these things occur for a newborn, and it can be no prenatal care, it can be the mother refuses a drug screen, the mother's poor, the mother's getting benefits, the mother, they have checklists that they say collectively those checklists create some type of a syndrome. The same thing, happens with parental alienation or Munchausen's, uh, uh, which I think they have retermed that, but that's basically the same thing. They're like, oh, we see this, and this, and it can't be anything else other than.
So Terry, the three symptoms that we're talking about under the case, they talk about subdural hematomas, retinal hemorrhage, and brain swelling. And so the claim is that the presence of those three together necessitate a finding of shaken baby syndrome with many people in the medical community, and that's an incorrect assumption. It's a leap of logic too far, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, because
Well,
experts
if
have
you've
so
done
much
enough,
weight in the
if
courtroom.
if you've done enough of them, what else could it be? Basically, what the doctors are saying is we've seen these three in combat, the ones who support shaken baby syndrome. We've seen this combination, and this is what it is. There is no other explanation. So, what other explanation could there be?
Okay, so first of all, even though they say those three symptoms are pathognomonic for shaken baby syndrome, when you look at the studies, none of the studies show all three symptoms showing up in the cases. Okay, so Some of them have two symptoms, some of them only have one. So I did not see, and in this particular lawsuit or in this opinion, all three don't show up at the same time. Okay, so that's one thing. So what else could it be? So for instance, it could be a stroke. A baby could have a stroke. A baby could have, some type of allergic reaction to formula if they're formula fed. There are other things that can cause, now a short fall. A baby can fall off of a bed or off of the couch and have some injuries occur. So they don't have a lot of studies on what are all of the injuries that could occur from short length falls.
One of the big things, though, was in that is a legal move that gets made. And it's very, very subtle. But you could have, let's say you have all three of those factors present. Okay, that becomes that medical determination becomes a per se legal finding of child abuse.
Exactly.
So medical findings magically transform, when all three are present, into a legal finding of child abuse. Now, as Connie just said, in a lot of these expert opinions, only one or two of the factors are present, yet it still magically turns from a medical finding into a legal finding of child abuse. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, which has always been one of my complaints, that they diagnose child abuse. I'm like, child abuse is not a diagnosis. It is a legal status. And I have argued against the child abuse pediatricians being able to use that term in their testimony. And it's hard to get the judge to rule it out, to say, no, they're not, they're going to be prohibited from saying that. But child abuse is not a medical diagnosis.
Right. Let me add, NBC a few years ago did an award-winning podcast called Do No Harm, where they showed a lot of these child abuse pediatricians were falsely diagnosing all kinds of things all over the country. I think child abuse pediatricians, and unless I'm mistaken, Maya Kowalski was diagnosed by a child abuse pediatrician. So I think that's voodoo. You mentioned that another explanation for what a doctor diagnoses as shaken baby syndrome is a short fall, which is at the heart of a Texas death penalty case that I think you have been following. This is Robbie Robertson. His daughter died when she was, I think, 2. He claimed that it was a short fall. The cops didn't believe him, and the medical experts determined it was shaken baby syndrome. Am I right? And he's scheduled to die. Can this ruling in New Jersey help him? He's in Texas. It's not in the same state. Can it help him?
Yeah, definitely. And, on the Roberson case, they had a Senate hearing in Texas, and I watched the entire Senate hearing, and Dr. Phil came in and testified. And another interesting witness that appeared was the actual detective who had interviewed Robert Roberson when the investigation was going on and had helped convict him. And he actually came to testify in Mr. Roberson's behalf. So there's a real question here. Once a case is decided, it's often very, very difficult to get new science in the case or to get an additional expert in the case. So this is going to be a challenge, but I would say definitely this should affect his case.
All right.
The background on it is pretty egregious, Mike. If you know that I think there's been over 35 exonerations in California, Kentucky, Minnesota, a whole slew of states on shaken baby syndrome related convictions. So since the Roberson case went up, there's been the legal trend has been towards unreliability of the shaken baby syndrome. So that factors into it as well. I think it comes to a head with the New Jersey case, but you cannot mistake the trend that's happening.
And I also want to say,
go ahead.
I just want to say something real quick. You were quoting that article a minute ago when the newspaper article said that the opinion declared it junk science. I don't think that language is in the opinion. I read the opinion. Now I could have missed that one word in 157 pages.
I wanted to ask you that. Why do you think the opinion doesn't determine it to be junk science? It might be that news people who are also not legal or medical experts may have made a leap that wasn't necessarily in the opinion. I agree with that.
I just don't the term junk science normally.
Right. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
don't think the
Okay.
word junk science is a legal term either. What the conclusion says is that the state has not met its burden of proof. Okay.
Right.
That's what the opinion
It,
says. Now, I do want to say before we jump back over to Roberson, there was a pretty strong dissenting opinion in this. And for people who are lay people, a dissenting opinion means, so they had 5 people, I think, on their Supreme Court panel. A dissenting opinion means we don't agree, right?
less than three agreed.
Right,
That's what a
right,
dissenting opinion. They lost, but they have the right to write why they think they should have won. What
right.
a dissenting opinion, because I've seen them used. What legal weight does a dissenting opinion have? Because you lost. Why should that carry any weight at all? Good for
Well,
you. Good for you.
okay.
You still you're in the you're the loser. We don't we're not crowning the Utah Jazz in the finals. We're crowning the Bulls. Why does it matter what the dissenting opinion said?
Well, from a legal standard, I have used dissenting opinions before because law changes, science changes, law changes, right? I mean, you could get me way into another conversation about some things the Supreme Court has overturned in the past few years, but there are things in here. And, there are other cases that are quoted in here. There are other research articles that are quoted in the dissenting opinion. So, and that's another reason why I want people to be real careful about saying, oh, SBS is junk science. I can't use it anymore. I want people to be prepared. And if anybody is facing this very critical issue, which is criminal, as well as losing your children, as well as rehoming your child, I mean, cutting your child off forever from their parents, it, it's not declared junk science. It's declared like the state has not met its burden of proof to show that it's widely accepted within the scientific community enough to be presented to a jury, which has the strong influence of expert opinion. So, I want to give this little insert here is there's another standard for expert opinions called the Daubert standard. And the Daubert standard came much later and like 50 years later in 1993. And the Daubert standard is a little broader in that it says that a judge can make a determination whether or not it is reliable science. It is sufficient reliable science to be presented to a jury as an expert. So, but New Jersey used the Frye standard. So every state is a little bit different. Some states use the Frye standard, some states use the Daubert standard. So if you're in a particular state, of course, you would need to look at that. But there's so much good stuff in here is the reason I want us to like have this discussion and put it out there of how critical it is.
And,
Let me
and
get
Mike,
back.
Mike, I want to make a quick point about dissenting opinions and why they're so important. Justice John Marshall Harlan declared in 1896 that our Constitution is colorblind in a dissenting opinion in Plessy v. Ferguson.
Mhm.
That was overturned famously by Brown v. Board of Education.
Mhm.
Justice Brandeis in 1928, he said in a dissenting opinion, the right to be let alone is the most comprehensive of rights. And that became the groundwork for the United States versus Katz decision in 1967 on our modern Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. And probably most importantly, 2018, it was a repudiation of the 1944 internment case of Korematsu versus United States, where Japanese Americans were interned just because of who they were, because of their race. And Justice Jackson dissented. And he said, once a judicial opinion rationalizes such an order, the principle lies about like a loaded weapon. So we have a long history in American jurisprudence of looking to dissenting opinions for guidance, because the decision is made at the time, but there might be larger and overwhelmingly important other issues that coalesce later on. So
Yeah.
I think that kind of 100% correct when she says that we have to look to.
I don't remember the judge, but in a dissenting opinion, he said that he called Brady violations an epidemic. and it's one that I cite all the time. Justice Kavanaugh, clerk for this justice. I can't remember the guy's name. As far as Roberson's case, as I understand it, it came down almost exclusively to the so-called science. His daughter's definitely dead. She was definitely very young, so that's evidence of murder, not overwhelming evidence. Um, but basically, doctors said, based on what I see, the only explanation is shaken baby syndrome. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's what they said in his case. Yeah.
I'm against the death penalty. I was against it before I learned about this case, but this is the kind of case that makes me against the death penalty. You're going to kill this guy based on, and the interesting thing about expert, it's an opinion. They actually say it, but it's treated as fact because you're an expert, even though you're stating an opinion. So basically, they got enough people to say, in my opinion, the only explanation could be shaken baby syndrome, and then they convict him of it.
Yeah, and look at the next paragraph in that down there. Right,
Mhm.
no, right there. Mr. Roberson's case is riddled with unscientific evidence right there. And it talks about how his daughter had a high fever, had a high
Mhm.
fever.
Mhm.
Nobody said what the high fever was from, right?
Mhm.
Which could have been some type of infection. It could have been an infection in her brain. It could have been a blood infection, right? If she
Mhm.
had a blood infection, it could cause bleeding. It could cause bleeding from her veins and arteries.
Mhm.
And and then this other sentence in here is very important. Hospital staff did not know Mr. Robertson had autism and judged his response to his daughter's grave condition as lacking emotion. He was prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced. So many times, and this is, you mentioned the Kowalski case. So many times when a parent is in the hospital and they're facing these terrible situations, and I know he had autism, but this happens to parents who do not have autism. And you go in there and they're like, "Did you shake your baby? What happened? What did you do? Did the baby fall? What did you do?" And parents struggle to try to relive every minute of the past 48 hours of their life. And, maybe the baby rolled off the bed or, something of that nature. So they really struggle for that. Yeah, this case, the Whitaker case in Tennessee, I watched this one unfold starting in 2013. I can tell you some really twists and turns of this case that were not reflected in the article. But this young dad, Joe Whitaker, is still in prison. He
Mhm.
is, I think ended up getting 15 years in prison. He lost all of his kids. His wife divorced him, but I had many conversations with his wife, and she went and testified at that trial in his defense to say that he did not hurt that baby. And, she called me after her testimony just bawling. And they had I think it was three experts of their own that they got, and the judge disqualified every one of their experts. And so they ended up not really having any defense medical expert at all. So, and a sort of a weird little twist to this case is Joe's criminal defense attorney got his son and is raising his son. So, how do you like those apples?
Interesting. But how often did you see shaken baby syndrome as an accusation in and DCS is the equivalent of Child Protective Services in Tennessee, where you're an
Yes.
attorney. How often did you see DCS make that allegation?
So I think I personally only had one or two cases.
Mhm.
And, we were able to sort of wind our way away from that allegation because they didn't have enough medical evidence. But, again, this is Terry LaPointe's article that she wrote. She, had many articles that she wrote articles for 4 years all across the country. And there were
So
several that
you
she came up
definitely
with.
were exposed to it. Now I don't want to I don't want to give you too big a head. You're a pretty good lawyer to a really good lawyer. If people can afford you, it's easy. But I think a lot of parents who get caught up in CPS don't have the money for a lawyer. And in that case, even if the evidence is there, is it really hard on your own to unravel this and present the evidence in the right way to show that it's all bogus?
Well, one of the things that I do now is I still talk to a lot of people. People call me all the time, every day. I probably have 4 or 5 phone calls about cases across the country. And I really, and these are the actual parents, and what I really struggle to do is prepare the parents better, right? Like, how
Mhm.
can I help a parent be prepared to deal with their attorney, or be, how can I help them find expert witnesses, et cetera? With this case out of New Jersey, the good expert witnesses are listed right in this case. So you have a roadmap of who to go to talk to, number one. But also, like, if your attorney, if you have a court-appointed attorney, which if you're involved with a CPS case or a criminal case and you can't afford an attorney, they have to give you a court-appointed attorney. A lot of court-appointed attorneys either are not equipped to deal with medical experts, or they don't have the time, or they don't get paid enough. That's just the reality of it. So the parents or their parents or family members or whoever who can help them need to start understanding how to dig through this. And I will be honest, in one of the first fractured rib cases I have, it was the mother who helped guide me to the correct experts, because that's all she had to do all day was get online and Google and look for people. And I had 24 other cases. She's the one who helped me find the proper experts. So the parents need to be prepared to go to their attorneys or contact these experts themselves and help get them involved in their cases.
All right, Rich, I've kind of monopolized. Ask a few questions.
Your point on this last point, you advocate a lot for law reform, Connie. The Advocates for Families Act, that you've proposed that to give a dedicated family advocate during the child welfare cases. Have you had pushback from that? Why do you believe that a non-family advocate would be a game changer? And don't the bar associations get a little upset when laws like that are proposed?
Yeah, the non-attorney family advocate is what we are proposing. And yeah, we're doing that. So we have a whole little army, an underground, basically. We have a whole underground army of people, primarily people who have had some type of experience with the system. And then they are coming in now. Peer advocates and advocates have been recognized in several areas, such as veterans with disabilities, such as education, other types of disabilities, Social Security. There are advocates, recovery, peer advocates in the criminal system. So the peer advocates have been recognized, and we're trying to get a federal bill to permit them, not that they're required, but to permit them to participate. The reason we have to have that federal bill is because under the federal funding scheme, everything is confidential. A young mom, and let's say Charlotte Whitaker in this case. So Charlotte Whitaker, when she was trying to defend and get her babies out of DCS custody, she could not even have her own mother standing in the courtroom with her. She couldn't have a sister. She couldn't have a support person. Although there are areas within the administrative process you can get a support person, but attorneys, I know from practice in law, attorneys do not have the time and resources to walk these parents and families through this system like they need to. They just don't have time. Attorneys think about one thing, litigating a case. That's it. They want to go to litigation. They want to get their discovery. They want to prepare for a trial. There are so many other nuances to this that are so important that is covered. And are we getting some pushback? Yes, some, and no to some. There's right now, North Carolina has a family advocate law in place. I spoke to an attorney over there, and at first she was against it. But when I said to her, how much help would it be to you if you had someone helping the family identify their witnesses, getting their witnesses lined up, identifying what evidence might be helpful to them, helping them be prepared for placement? And she absolutely agreed. So that's the role of the advocate.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate on this as well. So you have been a across the board critic of government overreach and deep state and some of these other things in national politics, in your writings and your blogs. If we're going to reform the child welfare system, isn't a bloated Title IV, Title IV-B, Title IV-D, Title IV-E part of the problem? Isn't funding these state systems with federal dollars creating almost like a irresponsible drunkenness on federal monies? Isn't that part of the problem?
Oh, it's the problem. It's the problem because, and I have started speaking publicly 10 years ago, actually, and I went to an indigent task force and I sat in front of, 12 people who were judges and state representatives and heads of bureaucratic departments. And I said, there is an internal, irreconcilable conflict of interest when you call an agency Department of Children's Services and all you do is fund prosecution. Right? I mean, I was a prosecutor. Like I say, the public defender was across the street and we both walked into the courtroom and I'm like, lock him up, lock him up, lock him up. And the public defender on the other side of the room is like, hey, he's a nice guy. He just needs a little help. Just put him on probation, judge. He'll be fine. Right? So this agency is funded to prosecute. It's funded to prosecute. And Title 4D is tied right into it. And I'm totally opposed to all of that funding. And I deal with people, I talk to people about it every day.
But
How does your proposal change? How's your proposal any different though than feeding a bloated beast?
How's my proposal different? My
The
proposal,
Advocate for Families Act. You're actually creating more court-paid or court-appointed people in the situation. You talk to a guy like Mike Volpe. Mike Volpe's situation is to get rid of all the court appointments altogether. So how do you drive the advocacy under the Advocates for Families Act versus the bloated court appointment monster that we have, as you've identified as a problem?
No, great question. First of all, it's not court appointed. Okay, we don't want to be. They don't want to be court appointed. They are permitted. The thing with court appointed, I'm sure as an attorney, if a guardian ad litem gets appointed, you can never get rid of them, right? So this is intentionally not court appointed. So if a family says, I don't think you're helping me, I don't think you're any good, I don't want to deal, please just close, whatever you're doing, that's fine. Also, it's not directly associated with the agency. So it's an independent service that is now the funding. We are not asking for money. As the advocacy grows, there are different ways to fund it. One of them is through certain nonprofits, such as the Casey Foundation, who wants to reduce foster care. So there are some nonprofit groups that really want this to happen. They want to reduce the foster system because it is so broken. And there's also will be some funding under Title 4B, which is family preservation money, which can help in specific issues such as substance abuse. So you are exactly right. This is parallel to the system. I have said for a long time, we can't fix the system by attacking it. We have to fix the system by figuring out a way to work all the way around it until we can bust it open and start exposing it. The other thing that we do as advocates is we collect data and we collect information and we see where laws are being broken. For instance, 18 USC 666 is theft of federal benefits and programs. And when you have an agency who is holding children hostage to be able to get federal funding, that is a federal crime. And we certainly intend to start exposing those federal crimes.
Rich, you got a few more?
Yeah, I got another question. You've been an ardent supporter of Trump. What concrete steps do you think that he can do to change things in the child protective system? He's been in for almost 12 months already, and he's had a lot to kind of clean out. But when Doge came in the beginning, we thought maybe that might be the way to do it. Now Doge is technically disbanded, and it's in a couple of other agencies now. What can this administration do from a federal level to try to rein in DCS?
No, great questions. I'm so glad you're here today. Okay, so number one. So first of all, in June 24th, 2020, last time he was in office, he did do an executive order regarding really sort of directing his agency, which is so Administration of Children and Families is a sub-agency of Health and Human Services. Okay, so he really did direct his agency to produce certain data to him, but the very first sentence of his executive order says the best foster care system is one that we don't need at all. Okay, so unfortunately, he got booted out of the White House and we weren't able to get the stats that he had required from that executive order. Secondly, I'm so glad you asked this question because on October, let's see, when did it was a day before the
We're
government
we're
shut down.
looking at it. I think it's
Oh,
November
November
13th.
13th,
November
there it is.
13th, Fostering the Future for American Children and Family. This is the foster
Right.
care, but it's in another executive order. Go
Okay, but
ahead.
now stop right there. Section 1, what does it says? My administration is dedicated to empowering mothers and fathers to raise the children in safe and loving homes. Okay, so that is the driving statement of the mission. And then there's another statement in here where it talks about, I won't be able to find it, but it talks about unnecessary removals, to
Mhm.
limit unnecessary removals. And then it talks a little bit about relative placement. And then for the children who are adopted, that they don't return to the foster system. So he has a recognition that the foster system is broken. We've had a huge report that's come out of the Senate about the number of missing foster children. He talked, when he introduced this executive order, he talked about the number of the children aging out of the system, which basically are government bastards, right? They have no mother, no father, no nothing. They just belong to the government and they age out and now they belong to nobody. So he spent some time talking about that. Now, that's one side, which we are using to help promote our family advocate bill. But the other side is audits. Okay. Now, I know Doja's not there anymore. However, there has been the initiation of several audits that include audits within the child welfare system. It's been very difficult to audit them because they don't get the right data. But one of the places where we can cross-reference with them is Medicaid. And there have been tons of Medicaid audits, and there has actually been small audits that has busted up CPS. For instance, there was a group home, I think in Missouri, that was busted for making Medicaid claims for psychotropic medication and counseling that they weren't doing. So we have to peel this back one layer at a time. But hopefully, I don't like who they appointed to the ACF. He's a young guy out of Idaho, and I don't think he's really equipped to handle everything that needs to be done. But we are working several different angles. We're working from the federal crimes angle. I'm constantly working from the state legislative angle. We have a new governor's race coming up in Tennessee in 2026. I've been in the face of every person. There are three main gubernatorial candidates. I've been in their face. I was just in one's face Monday morning. Actually, I'm going to something else tomorrow night. So getting more people activated who can help. And I really encourage anybody who's watching this who wants to help, who can join the force, just get in contact with me. And, we need
And
all the
through
help we
Family
can get.
Forward Project, we'll show that. But we interviewed Terry LaPointe, who you know and like. She mentioned the same thing you mentioned: Social Security, Title IV, ASFA, CAPTA. A lot of people see that as the problem. How come you guys can't get enough of the legislature and one president to see that as the problem and to either sunset these laws or transform them so that the financial incentives aren't to take kids and adopt them out, but to keep families together? How come a majority of the House and Senate can't see what you and Terry see?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for asking that. So basically, CPS is like a mini USAID. Okay, like you think about USAID and what happened and taking those down. There are so many private contractors. There are so many NGOs. There is so much money passing hands. There are so many lobbyists. So there's a website called opensecrets.org, right? They've changed the website, but 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I went into opensecrets.org and you can type in a keyword and find out the lobbyists. I typed in foster care and there were 147 lobbyists, okay? So they've taken those out. They've taken that keyword out because I started talking about it on social media. It's funny how things like that happen, right? But there are so many lobbyists. Omni, Eckerd. Eckerd was a huge retail pharmaceutical corporation. There were Eckerd drugstores everywhere. They've gone out of the business of retail pharmaceuticals, and they're in the foster care and group home business. The YMCA in Florida is in the foster care and group home business. Omni, they're huge. These things are huge. The amount.
Salvation Army, a bunch of others. Yeah.
Oh, the Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, they're huge. Omni, Camelot. Uh, it is so out of control. It's so bad. Let me tell you, I think it's Missouri or Oklahoma. They have created this residential community where they build houses just to create foster homes within this residential community. They build these houses so that they have 4 or 5 bedrooms, and they put a quote unquote foster parent, which is supposed to be a family setting, by the way, and they're creating these mini group homes. There is so much money. There's so much money in the pharmaceuticals. All these kids end up on pharmaceutical medication. The detention centers, Tennessee just asked for the Tennessee CPS just asked for another $81 million in capital investments to build another child institutional facility because they think parents are so bad. They have the narrative that they have created that parents are bad and the government can do it better. You would think a village, the whole village concept of the Democrat Party that they started putting out there would be blasted by the Republicans, and it is not, because the Republicans want to privatize everything, right? They want everybody to make a dollar off of it.
Connie,
I want to ask one thing. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I believe that the solution to CPS is basically its abolition. In my opinion, if whatever the parent does rises to the level of a crime, so if they're molesting them, that's a crime. Beating them, that's a crime. Starving them, that's a crime. There are police for that. There's a show, some of you may have heard it. It's called Law and Order SVU. It's only been on a couple of years. Most police departments have them. Even the ones that don't, there are plenty of cops trained to investigate. And if it's something like you saw the kid out barefoot and it's 50 degrees out or even 40 degrees out, leave it alone. That's not, if it's too messy, it's all junk food. That's not for the state to get involved in. So if it's a crime, police get involved. If it's less than a crime, I don't think that the state has any involvement. So I don't know when CPS came about, but to me, the answer is this is not an agency that's necessary. Do you agree with that? Or is this an agency that can be reformed?
Right. I agree. And, I was a prosecutor. I started out of law school as a prosecutor, and my very first case was a jury trial of a baby who was killed. And I did an outstanding job. I put the guy away in prison for a long time. So definitely, I think prosecution of child abuse is law enforcement. And, I say that the agency at least has to be dissected. There are agencies within the state bureaucracies that all they do is provide services. For instance, in Tennessee, there is the Department of Substance Abuse, Mental Health, and Developmental Disabilities. Okay. All they do, they're just a service agency. If somebody has a child with autism, they can contact that particular agency. They can get needs for their child. They can get things to happen. They never prosecute anybody. Okay. I think the same thing with children's services and family services. It should be strictly a service organization. If they get a report that rises to criminal conduct, it should be referred to law enforcement. And I'm glad you brought it up, because right now in Alabama, I work very close with Kenneth Pascal, who's a state representative, and we are working on a bill. We finally got the final draft in. They're going to be Senator Al Britton and Kenneth Pascal, who's a state rep, are going to be introducing this bill. That's one of the things that it says is that if they get a report that rises to criminal conduct, it needs to include law enforcement. I think the agency has to be totally dissected. The specialty of investigating child abuse, maybe there needs to be an add-on to a state agency like a Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, GBI, wherever, Florida Bureau of Investigation. Maybe they need a special investigation unit for that, but it needs to be criminal and not civil.
So on that point, I want to ask a question about the thing that nobody wants to talk about. Yet it's readily apparent, I guess, to me and to many. And that is child sex trafficking and the foster care system. There were scandals in Maryland and Atlanta or Georgia with children, large number of children going missing. Now there's one that Bailey Templeton, who's running for State House in Illinois, she was on with us and she talked about how it was maybe 12 kids that went missing. Then it jumped to 164. And then the authorities there, Pritzker's government, is tight-lipped about what's going on. I think it's very clear the foster care system, there's somebody on the inside, and they're aiding and abetting child sex trafficking. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure it out. that these children are being used as inventory, as sex devices by perverts. And if we're going to use anything, we use our resources to go after these people first. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you're so right. I think it's so much deeper than we even know because, everything's done in secret, right? You can't get records. As a matter of fact, I have reported foster homes for abuse. I have a video of a 10-year-old, 8-year-old who's locked up in a room crying to get out of her room, and the foster parent never got prosecuted. It is so bad. I don't know if you remember seeing this summer the Bibb County, Alabama newscast where these children were pulled out of basically a basement, and they never told you, although the very first report said that some of these children were foster kids, and it also said that a report had been made 6 months earlier to their CPS agency who did nothing. So and then in Memphis, here in Tennessee, we had the National Guard, or the Army, I guess, went into Memphis and started pulling out all the illegal aliens. And oh, goodness gracious, they found 123 children. It's like, what? But they won't tell you, who are these children? Where did they come from?
There's a definite trafficking connection. And you said about these orphaned children that are children of the state, and then they turn 18. And there's a direct connection to female sex trafficking. They end up in the ports in Maryland and in California. Then they end up overseas, someplace as sex slaves. So there's a direct line from this foster child sex trafficking to the adulthood, and then they disappear off the grid because they have nobody there, and they become sex trafficked victims. So this is a disgraceful thing. I think that should be the number one thing that people look at. Yet we see the government inaction. And the latest one in Illinois is probably the most disgusting one we've seen in a while with J.D. Pritzker's Illinois government.
Anything you want? But I firmly believe this. Even in cases of actual abuse, 9 times out of 10, I think that child is still better off with their biological abusive parent than winding up in foster care. Foster care is so bad, even it's still better to be abused by your biological parent.
Well, one of the statistics that are out there, a class of statistics about what happens to children who've been in foster care. I mean, and the statistics show you're more likely to be in prison. You're more likely to have your own children removed. You're more likely to be a substance abuser. You're more likely to not have a job. You're more likely to not have a college and sometimes even a high school diploma if you've been a child who's been put through the foster care system. So that alone should tell us that the system is broken. And, there are, I call them hostages. There are, 600,000 children who are being held hostage by the government, and very few people know what's going on with those kids.
And the idea that in that Trump executive order about family placement, there are plenty of good, grandparents and uncles and aunts that can take care of these children, yet they get shuffled to foster care as almost the default setting, which is a shame.
Yeah, you got that Bill Lee thing up there. Yeah, so let's talk about relatives, right? I just got off a phone this morning with a brand new case out of another county where they refuse to place the children with the aunt or the grandmother. And here's the problem. They don't get any money. They don't get any money if they do relative placement, which is required.
And this is a feature of ASFA and Social Security Title IV, am I right?
Right. Yes.
All right. And I wanted to transition. I think I saw, so November was National Adoption Month. Your state's governor, Bill Lee, made a proclamation. I think you criticized it. What's wrong with that? He wants people to be aware of adoptions, to be adoptive parents. What did he do wrong?
Oh boy. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about Bill Lee, because Bill Lee was on the campaign trail in 2018, and I stalked people on the campaign trail because you can always talk to them one-on-one. So I went to a Bill Lee event, and they have questions. Connie always raises her hand. And so I told them about DCS, and here's what he said to me in 2018. He goes, I know this system is broken because I work with a prison ministry, and we worked really hard with this dad to get him rehabilitated. We got him a job. We got him out of prison. We got him a place to stay, and DCS still refused to let him see his child. And I'm like, you are exactly right. And he did nothing. The very first thing he did in January 2019 is he put Jennifer Nichols as a DCS commissioner. Jennifer Nichols comes out of Memphis. And I have a whole story about Jennifer Nichols, about how she was a prosecutor over there in the Holly Bobo case, which I've been paying attention to as well, and how she twisted that whole case up and forced somebody to testify, or not force, but coach somebody to testify and lie. And so Jennifer Nichols was there for 3 years, 3.5 years. It was terrible. There are all kinds of complaints. I worked really close with a reporter named Peter White. We did some over 2 years. We probably put out 40 stories about what was going on. And then he gets rid of her. Now, remember, what was her background? Her background was a prosecutor. Okay. So she has a prosecutorial mentality. The next person he brings on is Margie Quinn. Margie Quinn comes from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, and she also has a prosecutorial mentality. So, and Margie Quinn has come in, and during Bill Lee's tenure as a governor, he has doubled the budget for DCS. He's doubled the budget from 800 million to well over $1.5 billion. Again, he's been criticized on many things. He was criticized for having special sessions. He was criticized on school vouchers. He was criticized during the pandemic. He is a tool. He's a tool, you know. He's a tool of people who
I'm going to play the ultimate devil's advocate, but what's wrong with more money? Maybe the agency didn't have enough money. Maybe that was the problem. They don't have enough resources. Now they've got plenty of investigators, plenty of money to give parents who don't have enough. What's wrong with doubling the budget?
Well, because they're doubling the budget by taking children, and they really haven't doubled the number of children that they are taking, but they have increased their acuity, okay, their acuity level, which means they've increased the amount of money that they can ask for from the federal government. So they're not doing any better. They're not doing any better. So they're putting more children in institutions. They created this thing called the Isaiah House, which was supposed to be a transitional house to put children in. The Second Look Commission came back and said they're using the Isaiah houses for sex trafficking. They had reports of that. So it's not any better. They're not helping families. They're taking kids and rehoming more children.
And Connie, you have several adopted children from Russia. That's correct.
Yeah, I have three.
I think Russia actually put the kibosh on Americans adopting Russian children because of the sex trafficking, right?
Well,
big things.
Yeah, so my children were adopted in 1996 and 2000, but shortly after that, Putin put the kibosh on all foreign adoptions. At that point, it was just because of the abuse. I mean, the reports that were coming out on child abuse of Russian adopted children were horrible, and they just shut it down.
Trafficking in the United States, that was one of the big ones. They wanted white children, and they had white Russian children, and then they would use them for sex trafficking. And Putin said, well, no more kids going to the United States.
Right. Rich,
and nobody follows up with those kids, you know. Nobody follows up with them.
Right. Rich, you got any other questions?
Well, I'm going to ask the question that we usually ask of our guests, and that question is a very simple question. We would like you to ask yourself a question and then answer that question.
Okay, so I don't know if I can answer a question, but I have a plea. So what can I do to help? Because a lot of people ask me that question. What can I do to help? So I do want people to tag onto our Facebook group. I know a lot of people have different feelings about Facebook, but that is the one place where we are sort of our final collection point. We have 25,000 members there now, and you can
and this is the group, Family Forward Project. And you're right, 25,200 actually, to be exact, and some change probably.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of people. It's been growing quite a bit. I want people to work with us to learn to be advocates. We also actually give advice. There are some people you can see there that one of those comments is D. McFall Prince. So what we've been able to do now with Family Forward Project is we have enough people who've been through this. You'll see D. McFall, she's in Alabama. And we have enough people who've been in the project for long enough. They've heard me speak. They know how to at least give people some decent information. Okay. One of the biggest problems we have right now with social media and TikTok and even X is that people are just spewing stuff out there. Ryan Mata, if anybody follows him on X, Ryan Mata just did a great documentary called Never in America, which he put me in. He didn't tell me he was putting me in there, but he pulled a clip from one of my news reports. So a lot of people find me through looking, Googling, and I've got lots of YouTube and stuff up there. So it's real important that where we are at this juncture, we get good information to people. And so joining Family Forward Project, being willing to learn what's your superpower? What can you help do? Can you contact legislators? Can you learn to be an advocate? Can you just be a support person and just, be willing to offer a hand? Parents get so discouraged in this process and they're in such a difficult place emotionally. So what do I want? I want people to join our forces.
All right, very good. Rich, anything else?
That's it. That's great. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for being
Thank
here,
you.
Connie.